Hello! Today we're going to be talking about how to create and install a distribution point. Sometimes you'll need to add an additional distribution point for like internet-based clients or clients in a different location, a geographical location where there's a lot of clients. So typically the rule of thumb, if you have a site or location that has more than 25 or 30 clients, you don't want to grab all that content over the WAN, so you want it to grab it over the LAN. So you want to place those distribution points in those locations. Depending on your network and how it's set up, it may be peer-to-peer, maybe some kind of like a hub site, or maybe it's just in a geographical location so that those clients get content locally from a distribution point. Or maybe you have one out in the cloud like Azure or AWS, where you have a distribution point there. So that's what today's video is going to be about: how to install and create the distribution point, what sites and boundaries how you want to set this up, and also the distribution point groups and what they mean. With that, there are requirements. You need to have on the DP that you're going to add as a distribution point. You need to have bits, remote differential compression, Microsoft C++. Now that gets installed by SCCM when you add the role. IIS, there's some components of that gets installed when you enable bits and remote differential compression, but the SCCM will configure and install the rest of the components for IIS. PowerShell, Raider, based on the OS that's installed. So those are the main. Oh, and then also you want to have no SMS on drive. So let me just add that because I just realized that there. So you want to have no SMS on drive.sms. And you want to place that on the C drive. Alright, so that's that. That's the main thing you want to do before you actually install the role. Now, what is a distribution point? It's a system role that contains source files for clients to download, such as the following: the application content, software packages, software updates, operating system images, as well as boot images. So all of those you want to have distributed to a distribution point or a distribution point group. And I'll get into that more later. And then, of course, the distribution point group. It simplifies the process of adding new distribution points. Content is replicated to newly added distribution points. Replaces the need to manually populate new distribution points with existing content. So the group, when you add it to the distribution point to a group, or should I say DP to a group, it will get all of the packages that have been assigned or assigned to that group. When administrators target distribution point groups, all members receive the content of the deployment. So I'll get into that a little bit later when we start talking about groups and stuff like that. So here, with that, I want to go ahead and walk you through how to install and add a distribution DP. I don't know why I'm having a trouble with those words. All right, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring up my DP that I'm going to have. Now here's my DP. Now what I've already done is I've already added the two roles. To show you real quick, I added bits here, and I added the remote differential compression right here. So when you add those two roles, it automatically adds some components of IIS when you do that. So once that's done, I also put, and then did a double check. So I need to add the no SMS. I usually do it, here we go, new text message on the C drive. So I'm going to put no SMS on drive.sms. So this will ensure that no content will get distributed to the C drive. It only goes to the E drive. You want to have a separate drive for your content. So I have a second drive here that says SCCM. So this is where all the content is going to be replicated to. It's going to be stored here. So we have that. And then you also want to make sure that the primary site server has rights to this DP to create the role. Otherwise, it just fails right off the bat. So we're going to go into make sure that the primary site server is in the local administrator group. and that meaning the SCCM server itself. So whatever your SCCM server name is, your computer account needs to be added. Now you can put it in a group and add the group in here, or you can explicitly add the machine name here if you want. I just decided to go ahead and add the name, but just make sure you add the primary computer account in the local administrator group of that DP. That way SCCM has rights to create the role and install the role. Otherwise, it won't work. So with that all done, now it's time to go ahead and add the distribution point role to this DP. So I'm going to go ahead and show you that right now. All the networking and stuff is set up. Make sure it's on the network, it's on the domain. So you want to have that there first. So we have that. So now I'm going to bring up my console. And I'm going to go ahead and log into it. Now, creating a new DP does take a little bit of time, because once you enable the role, it takes about an hour to install the components and configure those IIS components, and then you'll just at the point just monitor the progress and see when it's done. And I'll show you a couple areas where you can look. All right, and a couple things to look out for. Now, again, this is just 2012 server that I'm doing this on, which is fine. It's the same process for 2016 and 2019. It's no different. It's just that depending on the branch that you're on, the version you're on, it will install those components related to that version. So right now I'm on 1910, which is fine. So I'm going to go ahead and go launch the console. And so the distribution point that gets created will be a 1910 version. So anytime you upgrade your environment from 1906 to 1910, it also upgrades your DPs and your management points. So it upgrades the entire environment. So just keep that in mind. So it's just going to be whatever your current version is. All right, so you want to go into administration. You want to go into site server and site role. So here's where you create a new site system. And then you want to go ahead and browse. I usually do it this way, and then I just type in the computer name of the server that's going to be the distribution point. So I add that in there, and then I add the site. Now you don't need to do anything with here, because again, you're going to use a computer account. You can specify an existing account if you have that set up, but you don't need to. So this is all you need to do here. Click on next. And then if you have a proxy, you can put that information here. I don't have a proxy, so I'm not internet proxy, so I'm not going to do that here. But if your environment does, you'll need to put the information there. Now here I'm going to select the distribution point right here. So this is the role that I want to have installed on that server. So this is what I'm going to go next. And then you can put a description here if you want, like if it's an internet-based DP, or if it's Asia Pacific PC, or if it's based on a location or based on something. You want to maybe put a description here. Here it's just another DP. Now you click on Install and Configure IIS. So you want to do that. And if you want to enable some of these other features like branch cache and some other stuff, you can do that. But I don't. So the main thing that you want to make sure you're selected here is install and configure IIS. So it'll do all of that component for you. Then you click on next. And then HTTP. So again, this is going to be based on HTTP communication versus HTTPS. If I were to select HTTPS, if you'll see here, if you select HTTPS and only internet-only connections, this will allow you to communicate, manage Mac computers or have mobile devices. So if you want to do internet-based clients or Mac computers and stuff like that, allow only, and see this is only internet-only connect, and you can also allow mobile devices to connect to this distribution point. So this is if you want your environment more to be HTTPS, just make sure that port 443 is open in your environment. For my environment, I'm going to just select HTTP, which is port 80. And then I just go ahead and create a self-service. Now, if you did use HTTPS, you also need to make sure you import your certificates. And I'm going to go into another video on that later on when we talk about Mac management. So for right now, HTTP, I'm going to go ahead and use the self-signed certificates for this. And then I leave that default, and then I make sure this is set to E drive because I want the primary, and then the primary packets E drive. Now I leave the other two automatic because, you know, this is just a secondary location. Like if you have a fallback point that you wanted to, you know, fall back to, like if whatever reason it's something going on with that distribution point, that server is not, it's down or it's offline or something, you can always designate an off fallback location for these content. So you can define that here. I always set it to automatic, so whatever, and I'll show you that later on, you can actually define one of these DPs to be a fallback point for a distribution point. So again, main thing is the E, and then everything is automatic. Now this will not, because we put that no SMS on drive, it would not copy content to the C drive, only to E drive. So if E drive's not working, it's going to try to find some other DP if you have that configured. Otherwise, it doesn't do anything. It just fails. So this is where you want. These is your minimum requirements right here. And then you can configure a pull, which, you know, it's pulling instead of pushing. So depends on your environment and how things work in your environment. You can set this up to pull rather than push. So I'm going to skip that here because I don't want to do that. And then if you want to enable Pixie for this particular distribution point. Now I'm going to enable this later, but right now I don't need to. I like to do this separately. But you can enable it here while it goes through. I like to do it one step at a time, make sure the DP role gets installed first, then come back and right click and add Pixie. And then when you want to add Pixie, you just want to, you have to make sure that these ports are open. That's 67, 68, 69, and 411, and then UDP port 65 for operating system installation. So just keep that in mind for that. Now I'll go over Pixie in another video, but for this video, I'm just going to leave that alone for now. So we're going to click on next. Now you can use multicast. Most environments don't really use this, so I don't really see this enabled much, but if you find that you need to enable multicast, you can. I see some companies you enable this, and so if you do, you have to select these, you know, settings for that. So we can kind of go over that later. But for the basic minimum requirements for DP, you don't need to have this turned on. So we're going to skip that and go next. And then you want to click on validate content. So you want to make sure that the content is validated to ensure there's no content corruption. So this is how SCCM validates content on a distribution point. It ensures that the content in the content library and what's in WMI matches and is consistent. If that is not consistent, you'll get a warning message saying mismatch. So that means you've got a package mismatch. It means you got a package that's either in WMI and not in the package library, or you have something in the package library that's not in the WMI. And I did a video on that, and I'll link that in the video description below about DP warnings and how to solve those and how to fix those. All right, so we're going to do next here. And then here you can add a boundary group. So I like to do this later. Now, if I know what boundary this DP is going to go to, I can go ahead and add the boundary here. So if I click on add, these are my boundaries I currently have in my environment. Now, most corporations will have a lot more, like they'll have different sites, different locations, different subnets where this DP is going to be servicing. So you have to think about what subnets this distribution point is going to service. So you can select it here. Just make sure that that DP is in that location. So like if you're imaging a DP, like a box, you just got to make sure that that DP is the location that it's going to service. So I'll go ahead and do the Active Directory, so I automatically put it there. Now this is just for the boundary. This has nothing to do with the distribution point group. That's a separate thing. So I'm going to add it to this boundary because it's the main boundary. I can add a different boundary, say internet-based clients, and let that DP. Eventually, I'm going to add that internet-based client added there. But for right now, I'm just going to add it to the main. So you can do that here. Or you can do it later if you're going to move it someplace else later on. Just make sure you put it in that boundary. So then just go next. And then here's the summarization. Now, it doesn't ask you in the wizard which distribution point to add. You have to do that later if you wanted to be part of a group. Now, this is going to give me a summarization of what I selected. And then once that's done, taking a moment here. There we go. So then it's just giving me a summarization of the settings and all that stuff that I tweaked and enabled. And then it's going to start working. And now it's starting to work on creating. So when I click on this right here, there's the new DP and there's the role that it was installed. So if I click on that, and you'll sometimes have multiple different servers for different things, like, you know, you may have some management points here, your primary, your DP, you have your different stuff. I'll do a different video on how to add a management point. So right now it's doing that. So if I go over to my DP, I should start seeing files being copied over there. So let me bring that over. Again, that's just fine. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to check and see, monitor how that distribution point is going. So you go to distribution point status under monitoring, and you go to distribution point configuration status. And it'll tell you, like, if it's got pole configured. All right, so we got, now I have my primary as a DP as well. So now I'm going to go click on details and see what the deal is. Now you'll see it fail initially. That's normal. You just want to monitor it and make sure. Okay, so it failed to install. And okay, so basically we know that the computer account has administration rights. So let's go take a look here on my DP. Make sure I did not forget anything, as I just did. Now we know it has admin rights on the box. Oops. I'm just going to go ahead and add. And I'm going to also add so that's there, and then double check the computer account. And that is there. Okay. Oh, you know what? Yep, that's all there. Okay, so that's good. And so the other log file you want to look at, and you can tell here, you can see how it's still blank. There's no files yet, so that means it's not able to copy the files or start the install. So let me, so I can't look at the log files here, but there's another log file on the primary site server that you can look at. And it's called distribution point manager log. So since I'm already here on the primary, so I'm going to open up the log. We're going to go to this one, manager log, distribution point manager log, or just manager log. And this will give you more details on what's going on. So it failed to connect to the, okay, so again, so it could be a firewall issue. So let's go take a look at the firewall. Make sure the firewall's turned off. You have to make sure that if you do have the firewall on, that you added the, yeah, see. We're going to turn it off, off, great. Now, if you are using the Windows firewall, you have to make sure you add the ports in SCCM when you go in here. And again, I can do a different video on how to manage your firewalls within Windows, but here I'm just going to turn it off. So that was a clue that it couldn't connect. So I'm like, oh, it's a firewall. So I just turned it off. So now it should be able to connect just by the fact that it couldn't connect. So that told me there was a firewall issue. So So now I'm going to let it wait. So it's going to take some time. So we're going to go ahead and let it, again, it's going to retry again. It's going to sleep, and it's going to retry again. And then we'll go from there. Okay, after waiting for a certain amount of time, as you can see, the files are now showing up on the E drive. You see just SCCM content library. If you click on here, SMS, logs, there's also another log file that also give you some information. So basically, successful, yep. There's a couple content that it already distributed to. So this is good. So when we go back to the SCCM, let's go over here. Let me minimize this. Now that the files are on there, that's good. That's a good sign that the DP is actually. All right, so let me go over here and log into the console. And we're going to do a refresh. And there we go. It's still, this is a good sign. It's still saying it's distributing content, and it's still in progress. So, okay, gotcha. It's doing this part right here. That's restart may be required, but that's kind of normal. So I give it a little bit more time. Once it's done, it'll have a green check like this. That means it's complete. So right now it's still distributing SMS content. I'm saying restart may be required, but I'm going to give it some more time because it still says it's in progress. I like to give it time to make sure, like I said, I usually like to give it about an hour-ish and just check it. But so far it's working. The prerequisites I've installed is working because otherwise the DP role wouldn't get installed at all. It just would fail. And so while we're waiting for that to finish, if you go into disappointing groups, these are the different groups. Right now I have a primary. You can have another one called imaging. That's where you can put all your imaging DPs at. This is where you want to replicate all your imaging stuff, like your drivers, your boot image, you know, your OS, operating system and what have you there. Or you could have, you know, different site, like you have maybe a location that's doing imaging, and then you want to make sure all content related to imaging is distributed to there. So for example, if I go to the operating system and go to task sequences, and let's say this one right here, if I go to reference tab, I just need to make sure that everything referenced here, like all of these, are distributed to, like the operating system, Google Chrome, that, and what have you. If there's anything else you have listed here, you just need to make sure all of these references, referenced packages is distributed to that DP that's going to be used for imaging, or what have you. And then also if you have like a custom task sequence that's going to install a bunch of applications, you need to make sure that in this task sequence, anything that's referenced in that task sequence is also distributed to that distribution point. So just keep that in mind now. You don't have to replicate task sequences. You just need to make sure that the packages referenced for that task sequence is distributed to that distribution point. I hope that makes sense. I know this can get kind of confusing. So if you, for example, for packages, now if I go to packages, for example, you can distribute a package to a distribution point or to the group itself. So I can distribute this package, for example. I can do distribute content right here. And now I know this is already distributed to a distribution point, but let's say I wanted to, now once you distribute a package, and you can add to distribution point or the group itself. So if I select group, it's going to bring up a group. Now, if it's already been distributed to a group, that group will not show up here anymore. You just have to update the content. But here, if I wanted that package to be a part of this group, I just have to make sure that that DP, whatever that DP is a member of this group as well. And I'll show you that in just a second. So if I wanted this package to be a part of this group, anytime I add a new DP, and make it part of that group, it will get all the content that have been distributed to that group. And the same thing if you, right, so that's how the group works. So let me go back over to the group. If I go to monitoring, group status, if I click on here, I wanted to show you, see it's, okay, so I haven't distributed anything to this group. You can see right here, it doesn't have anything distributed. So if I come in here, click on this and go properties. Now I can always come back. Oh, that's not what I wanted to do. Down here, properties. I think there's a different section. Waiting for it to come up while we're waiting for that. So here we go. So you can come back in here and you can enable Pixie later on. Here's the group relationship. So right now, this distribution point is not a member of any group. So it's just a standalone DP right now. But if I wanted this to be a part of a group that those packages have been targeted, then I can add it here. And so anytime I add a new DP and put it in this group here called, so here's your different groups. So all your different groups will be listed here. So if I wanted this DP to be a member of this group, it will get all the packages that have been assigned to that group. That way it simplifies you having to one by one distribute packages to that DP. You can just add it to this group and it'll get all the packages that have been replicated to that group. So hopefully that makes sense. Again, I can add it here if I want to. So again, this is where you put that. And then if you wanted to see what content is currently on this DP, if you click on the content tab, it'll show you all the packages that are part of that distribution point. So you can see what packages have been replicated to this DP and what group it's been a part of. And this is how you can manage your content in your environment. And then of course, content validation. So I've already got that set up. And then here's your boundaries. So you want to check to see what boundary that DP is a part of. You'll have multiple boundaries. It can be based on your subnets in your environment. It can be based on 80 sites and services. And so let me just show you a little bit about boundaries for just a second. I don't want to go too far into that. So here's all your different boundary groups. So you can create a boundary group. And if I create a boundary group, here's your references. I can do the boundary group or I can just add. So these are, like right now, if I wanted to add a server to that, you primarily want to have your primary, your WSUS, your management point, and your DPs part of that boundary, depending on how you set up your environment. So if I click on site members right now, I can say add this DP to this boundary. Which I did earlier when I did the thing. This is a boundary group. So let's say I want to add this distribution point part of this group, so I can just do that here. So anything that's in this boundary group, whether it be a subnet of a collection of subnets or that 80 site, all the clients that are assigned to this boundary will get content from that DP. If that makes sense. So basically, if you've ever seen, like when you're troubleshooting packages and you're trying to figure out why something's not getting installed and you see that 0% download and it's stuck there forever, well, that's why. It's because the boundary has been misconfigured or something. So you have to make sure that that client is a member of that same boundary where that DP is located. I know it gets a little confusing, but hopefully that makes sense. Again, if you want more details on boundaries and that kind of stuff, let me know and I'll do a separate video on boundaries and firewalls and how to make sure that you put your DPs in those certain locations. But today's video is strictly all about DPs. And so, so I'm always coming in here checking the status of the groups as well as, now again, I didn't distribute anything to this group yet. So I can do internet-based groups, I can do all kinds of different stuff. So then I come in here and I check the DPs itself, the individual DPs that you have in your environment. And you can see I have two right now. One is on my primary and the other one I just created for this video. And again, this part takes a little bit of time. And I'm also going to do a report on how to manage all of your DPs. I have like an SSRS report It gives you, it's a really good report, and I'll show you that some other time when we get more into reporting. I want to start getting more into reporting later on. But again, this is, again, still in progress. Once this is green, I can add it to whatever boundary I wanted to add it to, and whatever group I wanted to add to by right-clicking and going to properties and selecting where, depending on what this distribution point is going to be in your environment. If it's going to be based on imaging, then you want to go and add a pixie, if you're going to do pixie booting or what have you. And so that's basically it in a nutshell when it comes to distribution points. It's a big part of, making sure you manage your content in your SCCM environment. So it's really important to design it well and design where you want those DPs to be located and where those clients are that's going to grab that content from that DP. And creating those groups helps simplify the, like you can just add a DP to a group, and if those packages have been assigned to that group, that DP will get all the packages from that group. So hopefully that makes sense. I wanted to do a video on this, and again, once this is finished, like I said, this may require research, but that's okay. This is normal. It'll eventually take its time. It'll be green. This is usually the last step, so I want to give it more time to do that, and then you're all set. You now have another distribution point that you've added to your environment. So let me know if you have any comments or questions in the comment section below. If this video was helpful to you, please smash that like button. It helps me. And again, thanks for watching. Subscribe. There's going to be a lot more content coming your way. Again, see you next time. Bye-bye.